Hey guys, this is Coral and welcome to the 500 Project. Today we'll talk about the horoscope of the war historian, Arthur Conan Doyle. Not many people are aware of Doyle beyond the fact that he was the writer of the famous series of Sherlock Holmes. Doyle was actually a doctor when he started to write the Holmes series but later abandoned medicine to pursue writing as a full-time career. Doyle wrote numerous novels other than the well-known detective series, such as The Lost World and The Valley of Fear, and wanted to be remembered as an authentic historical writer than a mere popular fiction writer. Unfortunately, his fame as the author of Sherlock Holmes outshined most of his other masterpieces, leaving Doyle to be uncomfortable with his very own creation, Detective Sherlock Holmes, which is why Doyle had to kill Holmes in the final problem. Known to be a very adventurous man, he was known to throw himself to dangerous situations to write stories he experienced firsthand. He goes on to exotic trips worldwide, often volunteering for militaries and wars just to be at the heart of the action. After World War I, he becomes an outspoken spiritualist, making him subject to considerable ridicule, damaging his reputation as a serious author. Now let's take a look at his chart. First thing we notice is Doyle's Gemini ascendant. Gemini ascendants are typically conversational, versatile and very clever folks. Geminis are very talkative beings, and I have yet to meet a Gemini that is reluctant to share his or her opinions on anything. They are natural-born writers and inventors. Doyle had a lifelong tendency to vocalize his ideas to the forefront, talking and expressing his ideas to the authorities and the public using newspapers and journals all the time. If Doyle had a Twitter account, there is no doubt that he would have reached 1 million followers. He was one of the first fully grasp the dangers of submarines during World War I and even advised that the British Navy must supply inflatable lifeboats when life vests were not mandatory. Also, Doyle kept a detailed journal to record his ideas, especially exciting adventures for him to use for his stories. Doyle regularly corresponding letters with his family is also definitely a Gemini habit. Now, let's take a closer look at the ascendant. What a busy first house. Most notably, the ascendant has a partile conjunction to Mars. Although Mars does not receive much dignity here, it is also not in a position to be heavily afflicted. Overall, this is an agile, youthful, intelligent Mars, willing to push Doyle to go on adventures and live to tell stories about it. This adventuring aspect is so strong that it affects Doyle's life in numerous ways. For example, before Doyle received his degree as a doctor, Doyle signed on to an Arctic whaler as ship's surgeon. The young medical student was appalled by the brutality of the exercise. But apart from that, he greatly enjoyed the camaraderie on board the ship, and the subsequent whale hunt fascinated him. This adventure found its way into his first story about the sea, a chilling tale called Captain of the Pole Star. This pattern of seeking violent action and writing stories, both fiction and non-fiction, based on real adventures are repeatedly seen in Doyle's lifetime. In 1896, when Doyle was in Egypt to alleviate his wife Tui's condition, Doyle gets a chance to serve as an honorary war correspondent. Doyle wasn't especially productive in Sudan, and he was quite disappointed when he didn't get a chance to see live action on forefront. However, in 1900, when the Great Boer War occurs and the British Army asks for military volunteers, Doyle was one of the first to write his name down. Doyle was not entirely motivated by pure patriotism but was attracted by the potential to write a history of the war from first-hand knowledge. All his life he had craved for adventure and had long prayed to experience war firsthand. Unfortunately, at his age with no military experience, he was not the best recruit material and was waitlisted with little hope. Later, with the help of a wealthy philanthropist named John Langman, he manages to find a position as a doctor at the front battlefield. Once Doyle was placed in South Africa, he was clearly intoxicated by the strange exhilaration of war. According to his journal, "There were nights on that journey which I shall never forget, the great train roaring through the darkness, the fires beside the line, the dark groups silhouetted against the flames, the shouts of 'Who are you?' And the crash of voices as our mates cried back the Camerons, for this famous regiment was our companion. Wonderful is the atmosphere of war. When the millennium comes the world will gain much, but it will lose its greatest thrill. Gathering first-hand knowledge of the happenings of the war, Doyle published The Great Boer War, a 500-page chronicle, in October of 1900. It was a masterpiece of military scholarship. It was not only a report of the war, but also an astute and well-informed commentary about some of the organizational shortcomings of the British forces at the time. Let us also take a look at Doyle's sun. Pay close attention as this is a very powerful structure. The sun located in the first house is actually the third house's lord. Therefore the creativity of the airy sun is capable of attracting attention to his writings and talks. This is a chart that can gain much popularity and honor from authorship and lecture. The other luminary being partile trined is the airy moon, which is the ruler of second house, making Doyle quite wealthy due to the success as a writer. However, the moon is also facing opposition from Saturn, a force that can deprive of her affluence. This structure actually represents his later spiritualism writing tendencies, but for now, let it be known that this Saturn is a grave force that is overall detrimental to Doyle's reputation and finances. An interesting thing we should notice is that the Sun is actually past the ascendant, technically positioned in the 12th house. The first house Lord Mercury is also in aversion. This may explain how he found his own popularity to be more bothersome and restrictive. Doyle was always stressed about how it was difficult to surpass his reputation as a commercial detective series writer, and he was constantly concerned that the popularity of Holmes would outshine his feats as a serious war historian. Lastly, let us concentrate on the spiritualism in Doyle. Most biographers of Doyle seem to lament the fact that his fascination to spiritualism and occultism was the start of his demise. However, you must keep in mind that in the early 20th century after the World War, mediumship and psychic research was a serious academic pursuit in Britain culture. Esteemed people were conducting mediumship seances, experimenting with Ouija boards, doing what they can to communicate with their lost ones. Doyle's Saturn is quite ominous as it governs both the house of the dead and religion. Gemini ascendants tend to be quite religiously vulnerable, and whenever they encounter a tragic loss, they appear to heavily seek some sort of divinity. Doyle lost his son Kingsley and brother Innes to the war, and their deaths provoked something spiritual inside of him. Therefore, located in the third house but ruler of the 8th and 9th, the grave, religious Saturn attracts Doyle into communicating the dead. Doyle was very skeptical about spiritualism at first, but as he frequently visited medium seances, attended lectures on clairvoyance and mesmerism, he became obsessed in pursuit of talking with the beyond. Just this structure alone may not have been enough for Doyle to be a spiritualist, however, showing partile square with the 12th house Mercury, which is the ascendant's lord, he shows utmost persistence and patience toward paranormal research as he himself engages in many of these spiritualist practices. Now this is where it gets interesting. As he gradually moved towards a wholehearted acceptance of spiritualism and started to announce himself as a fully fledged spiritualist, he started to deliver the spiritualist message to an agonizing world and offer comfort to the millions of bereaved trying to make sense of their losses. It was borne in upon me that the knowledge which had come to me thus was not for my own consolation alone, but that God had placed me in a very special position for conveying it to that world which needed it so badly. He phrases it as if he was stuck by a divine force to convey the spiritualist message. This is a typical response from a rising Gemini Jupiter. Ill-dignified Jupiters are communicatively active about their faith. They deliver the word quite literally. After 1918, because of his deepening involvement into the occult, Conan Doyle wrote very little fiction, writing arduously about spiritualism instead. He goes on to tours around the globe giving extensive lectures about the possibilities of spiritualism as if he is preaching faith. Although Jupiter is in peregrine detriment, being the lord of 7th and 10th house and located close to the ascendant, Jupiter's manifestation as intellectual faith is quite powerful. Jupiter is not the smartest of the planets. The great benefic demands faith and belief, which is not the realm of reason and analysis. However, it is because the Jupiter is in detriment, Doyle's religion takes on an intellectual color, distinctive features of early 20th century spiritualism. He preaches not by sermons or by religious charisma but by rational explanation of the potentials and proofs of spiritualism. Of course, we must remember that religion can never strive on a rational plane, which is one of the reasons why Doyle had to suffer through so much ridicule and mockery. In summary, First House Gemini Mars showed Doyle's identity as a war historian. He is a storyteller of fascinating adventures he experienced himself. The Gemini Sun partile trined with the Aquarius Moon shows his success as a popular author of Sherlock Holmes. Lastly, the complex of third house Saturn and the Gemini Jupiter on the ascendant, Doyle becomes a spiritualist lecturing the modern faith around the world.